We were married 40 years ago. We were married 3 years, we got a divorce. Then I married Marjorie.
But first you lived with Barbara.
Right, Barbara. But I didn't marry Barbara, I married Marjorie.
Then you got a divorce.
Right, then I married Katie.
Another divorce.
Then a couple of years later at Eddie Colicchio's funeral, I ran into her. I was with some girl I don't even remember.
Roberta.
Right, Roberta. But I couldn't take my eyes off you. I remember I snuck over to her and I said, what did I say?
You said, what are you doing after?
Right. So I ditched Roberta, we go for coffee, a month later we're married.
35 years today after our first marriage.
We were both born in the same
in
hospital.
1921.
7 days apart.
In the same hospital.
We both grew up
We
one
both
block
lived
away
in
from each
tenements.
other, on the Lower East Side.
On Delancey Street.
My family moved to the Bronx
He
when I
lived
was
on
10.
Fordham Road.
Hers moved when she was
I
11.
lived on 183rd Street.
For 6 years, she worked on the 15th
I worked for
floor
a very prominent
as a nurse,
neurologist.
where I had to
Dr.
practice
Bimmelman.
on the 14th floor, the very same
We
building.
never met.
Never met.
Can you imagine that?
You know where we met? In an elevator.
I was visiting
In
family.
the Ambassador Hotel in Chicago,
He was on the
Illinois.
3rd floor. I was on the 12th.
I rode up 9 extra floors just to keep talking to her.
9 extra floors.
Well, he was a head counselor at the boys' camp, and I was a head counselor at the girls' camp. And they had a social one night, and he walked across the room. I thought he was coming to talk to my friend Maxine, because people were always crossing rooms to talk to Maxine. But he was coming to talk to me. And he said,
I'm Ben Small of the Coney Island Smalls.
at that moment I knew. I knew the way you know about a good melon.
I knew the way that you know about a good melon. Yeah, those scenes are scenes from a movie that came out in 1989. This movie is called When Harry Met Sally. It's a phenomenal movie. It's really good, and it's about Harry and Sally and about their journey where they go from being friends to see if you can just be friends or to see if their friendship is going to grow into something more. Interspersed throughout the entire movie are these interviews with people, and they're telling their stories of their marriage. And you can see there, that's just a snapshot, a snippet of just a few of them. But as you can see, is each one of them, you can tell that their marriages are quite different. You have the one who has like a pretty rocky road to be together. And then you have the second one. You know those couples, right? That they literally have been together for so long that they're finishing each other's sentences. And then you get the third one who says, I just knew. I just knew from the moment that I saw him, like you know about a good melon. We're starting a new series called When Faith Meets Relationships. It's hard for me to believe that we're in November now of 2025. And so it was all the way back in January we started this series, this theme for 2025, where each week we're going to ask a different question, 52 questions for 2025. And so now we're getting into the home stretch. And the entire time that we've been doing this theme this year, I've been looking forward to this series called Faith Meets Relationships. Because I think it's really good to know answers. I think it's really good to know all of the things. But I think about it this way. When I was in seminary, there was a classmate of mine. His name was Mark, and he was an incredibly smart guy. Mark knew everything. He knew all the theology. He knew all the Bible. He knew all of the ways of Bible history. He knew all the characters in the Bible. He knew all the stories. But one of the things that Mark struggled with, and this is one of my good friends in seminary, Mark struggled with taking it from here and bringing it out there. And I remember one time Mark and I were talking about it, and he's like, Jeremy, I just don't know how to make sense of that. And I said, Mark, but if we cannot make sense of that, then how do we take our faith into our everyday life? And when we think about who we are as people, as human beings, we are made to be in relationship with one another. That's just who we are. We can't not do it. And so if we can't answer the question, how does faith impact and imply our faith and use it to inform our relationships, well, then we're not allowing God's word to shape and to form our life. And so obviously, as you saw in the clip, today we're going to talk about what it means to have faith intersect with our marriages. But we're also going to cover some other things over the course of this series. But how does it inform our marriages? How does it inform the way that we raise kids? How does it inform our relationship with our coworkers and our friendships and the community in which we live? Now, I know for some of you, you already think, like, we're talking about marriage tonight, and I'm not married, or maybe I used to be married, or I don't want to be married, or maybe for you, marriage is something that seems like it's just a long way off, that it's something that's like not even the most distant distant thought that you could have. But it matters. It matters for two reasons. One, if you're somebody that says, I'm at this age, and so I don't need to start thinking about it now, absolutely you should. Because it's not just about, like, marriage, it's about relationship. And two, one of the beautiful things about being in the church is that we're a part of the body of Christ. We're not individual members that just kind of collect ourselves together whenever it feels like we should be in worship. No, through the power of the Holy Spirit, we're members of one body. And so the Bible says that we rejoice with those who rejoice. We mourn with those who mourn. And there's this really important thing that happens when we are able to do life with one another. That there are people who, even if we aren't married, whose marriages that we can help. I think about it this way. When Bridget and I got married, at our wedding, we chose who were going to be our groomsmen and who were going to be our bridesmaids. And we chose those people very intentionally. Why? It wasn't because we thought, well, if I don't choose this person, then I'm going to be in trouble because this person chose me and all of those things. No, we wanted people to stand up for us that could point us back to the promise that we made to one another. That they were a part of that aspect of our marriage. And that was important. I think about when our kids were baptized. We had sponsors. And sponsors who would stand up with us when they were baptized so that as their life continued on, those people could point our kids back to the promise, not that they made to God, but the promises that God made to them. How important it is to have people in our lives that remind us of who we are, about what it is that we're doing. So when we think about marriage, this is something that we're all in together. I remember before we got married, Bridget's family, her friend, they threw all these bridal showers to her. I was never invited to any of them. But she'd have these showers, and I remember one of the showers that they threw for her, like everybody got to bring a recipe, and they had these recipe cards. There used to be these things called recipe cards. You didn't just say, hey, Alexa, tell me what the recipe for the... No, they had all these recipe cards. So each person that came to the shower, they would write like their favorite recipe on the card. Like whether it was a main dish, whether it was a vegetable, whether it was an hors d'oeuvre, whether it was a dessert, which was my favorite ones. And so they'd write the recipe on one side, and then on the back side of the recipe card, they would write down what the ingredient that they thought was essential for a good marriage. Like, here's what you need to know. Like, here's the ingredients. Here are the things that you need to uniquely put together in order for you and for your soon-to-be husband to have a very successful marriage. And those things were wonderful. They were great. They were really fun to read. But one of the things that was interesting is that those people didn't know the way in which Bridget and my life would come together. We needed something more than that. Same as it is with you. Like if I were to ask the question of each person that was here this evening, that a healthy marriage needs, and then I were to say fill in the blank, what would you fill it in with? A healthy marriage needs this. There's research I was looking into this last week, and if you were to think and to imagine what most people would say, what's the number one thing that people would say that a healthy marriage needs, what would you think that would be? The number one thing, according to statistics across the United States, when people are asked this question, the number one thing that people say about marriage, which I think on one hand it makes sense, but on the other hand makes me really sad. Because the number one response that people gave that is essential to a healthy marriage, they said compromise. Now, I know that on one hand you can say, oh, compromise, that's great, that's wonderful. Like, because you need to give a little in order to get a little. But what does compromise imply? It implies that in order for us to have a healthy marriage, I need to lose something. And I just don't believe that to be true. Now, there are times in our marriage where we do need to compromise on like what we're doing or what we're going to do. But to say that the key ingredient to a healthy marriage is to compromise, number two in what a healthy marriage needs is forgiveness. I think that that's really important. Down the list, you need to have like love, you need to have fun, you need to have common interests, and the one that comes right after a common interest says you need to be opposites, and it's like, well, which one is actually the way that it should be? The reason why it's important for us to talk about this is because we know, and you don't need to be reminded, and some of you know far too well, that marriage is hard. Statistically speaking. And I just want to hit the pause button really quick. Because when you read this first statistic that 39% of marriages that end in divorce, a lot of you know that far too well. Here's what you're not going to hear tonight. You're not going to hear that somehow that you're less than anybody else. You're not going to hear that somehow you did something wrong and somehow God looks at you any differently than he looks at any of us. That's just not true. And the reason it's important to talk about the reality of marriages that break up is because when that happens, you and I both know that there's just so much hurt that happens. So 39% of marriages, they end in divorce. It's really fascinating that 40% of divorces happen in the first 10 years of marriage. You've probably heard of the 7-year itch before. Why does that happen? Well, because it's in the first decade where for many couples they have a child. And all of a sudden they realize that a marriage isn't all romance. And sometimes a marriage includes dirty diapers, and includes screaming kids, and includes all of the difficult things that they thought, well, maybe that's not going to be part of the deal. Or maybe they thought, well, when I have kids, my kids are never going to be like those kids. How's that going for you? What I think is even more striking than that is 25% of divorces happen after 25 years. Why? Something that I refer to as the emptiness of the empty nest. Sometimes your sole focus in marriage for a lot of people is like, I just want to have kids, and so my life revolves around my child, and when my children leave our home, I realize that the person that I've been living beside, I just don't even really know them, or I don't even know if I love them. That maybe the foundation of my marriage wasn't built on what it should have been built. So what's the foundation of a healthy marriage? How do we make sure that we build our marriage, or maybe we rebuild our marriage, or maybe you're somebody who has gone through the breakup of a marriage and you say, I do want to get married again. And if that's you, I encourage you to go through the work of healing after the ending of a marriage, so that as you walk into it again, you can go into it as complete as any of us can. So what do we build our marriages on? It's the Bible reading that Ashley read for us just a few minutes ago. It comes from Mark chapter 10. And there are some Pharisees, people who were the experts in the law. They're the people who kept all of the rules. And so some experts come to Jesus, Mark chapter 10. This is kind of like probably 2/3 through the ministry of Jesus. He'd been around for quite some time. And the Pharisees saw that Jesus wasn't always doing things the way that they wanted him to do things. So they came to Jesus one time and they said, well, Jesus, when is it okay for a husband to divorce his wife? What's the boundary? At what point can you kind of just dismiss the person that you're with? And you see, the reason why they're asking this question is because there was a law that existed because of the hardness of people's hearts. And so in that culture, all that a man needed to do is to bring a certificate of divorce to his wife, and he could leave her. And in that culture, it was the men who had all the power. And so if you divorced your wife, you left her with nothing. So they asked Jesus about divorce. But it's fascinating that when they ask about divorce, Jesus tells them about marriage. Jesus says, let me tell you what marriage is all about. Let me tell you what healthy relationships are all about. You're asking the question of when can I walk away? Let me tell you about what holds you together. You want to know what the escape clause is. I want to tell you what the glue is. I want to tell you what's going to last. I want to tell you what's going to give you life and what's going to hold you together. And what's not just going to hold you together like it's kind of somehow fracturing apart, but what's going to hold you together in a way that you experience love and marriage and relationships better than you ever imagined that you could. And when Jesus answers, he starts by quoting from the very beginning of humanity. He quotes from Genesis chapter 2. Because the reality is the first thing we need to do to have a foundation of a healthy marriage is we need to have God at the center. A passage in the book of Ecclesiastes. The Ecclesiastes is the wisdom literature of the Old Testament. Solomon is the wisest person that's ever lived. God says to Solomon, ask for anything and I'll give you whatever it is that you ask for. And Solomon could have asked for money. He could have asked for good looks. He could have asked for anything like that. And Solomon says, no, I want wisdom. So Solomon writes so much. He writes most of the book of Proverbs. He writes Ecclesiastes. And towards the end of the book of Ecclesiastes, Solomon writes about the power of relationship. He says, two are better off than one. For when one falls down alone, nobody can pick them up. But if one has another, they can help that person up. Two are better than one, because if one lies alone, they can get cold. But if another can come alongside, they can keep one another warm. If one person is attacked and they're attacked and there's nobody beside them, they can get attacked from behind. But if there's another there, they can have each other's back. And then Solomon says, but a triple braided cord cannot be broken. Our son Trey, he plays football, he loves football. And so he plays running back. And so one of the things that he does is he has a back plate on the back of his shoulder pads. If you see football players now, like the cool thing to do, I don't know why it's cool, but the cool thing to do is all these college players, you see like they roll their jerseys up so it's like right here, so they're like all their abs and they're trying to show how strong they are. And you see this thing dangling, that's called a back plate. And so when you get a back plate, you get these screws that you can screw your back plate into your shoulder pads. But the problem is if you get hit enough, the screws come loose and then the back plate starts to come off. So that would happen to Trey, and so then last year, he started to zip tie his back plate to his shoulder pads. But the problem is if he had one zip tie, it didn't hold. If he had two zip ties, it didn't hold. And at the end of this last year, it ended just about 2 weeks ago, he came into our living room and he holds up his shoulder pads and his back plate's there, and his back plate literally was bent because he'd gotten hit so many times. And he's like, it held. My back plate held. And we're like, what did you do? And he said, I used 3 ties and I wound them together. And I said, hey man, that's like what Solomon says, Ecclesiastes. And he like rolls his eyes like, come on, Dad. You don't have to do everything. And I said, no. Listen to this. Look at any rope that's used for ships and for hauling things and for towing things. It's always a cord of 3. So that when you get hit and when it feels like everything is bending, it won't break. Why is it important to have God at the center of our marriage? Because it's me and it's you and it's God that holds us together, because life is going to come and life is going to hit and things are going to come from all sides, and it's going to feel at times that we're bending in such a way that we can't imagine how we could ever hold together. But with God at the center, Realize it's not all about us. It's not about our power. It's not about our strength. It's about what God doesn't just do in us. It's what God can do through us. This is why Jesus quotes Genesis chapter 2. He says, this is why that the husband must leave his wife. And he must leave his family, and he's joined to his wife. And the only way they can do that is to leave. I think one of the difficult things about marriage is that so often it's so easy to let other people in. Some of our good friends, they moved from Des Moines and they moved to Wisconsin. This was years ago. And when they were in Wisconsin, they consistently came home and they consistently called home, and they're wondering why they couldn't make their life feel like home. And my wife Bridget and I said, it's because you guys have never left. When we came here to Des Moines, we came here just over 16 years ago. And when we came, we didn't want to stay here. I came as an intern. We were going to be here for 10 months, and then after the 10 months were over, we were going to go back up north because that's where our family was. And so that whole first year that we were here, we didn't take any time to invest in any friendships. Because in our minds, we had never left home. I think one of the challenges and one of the gifts that Bridget and I have been given by our parents is by getting out of our marriage. That it's not me having a conversation with Bridget and her mom and dad, or Bridget having a conversation with me and my family. It's like 1 + 1 = 1. And there's nobody else that gets into that. You need to leave in order to be able to be together. And you got to be careful how and who you let into that. Like, who are the little birdies that you're talking to? There's a really strong word that Jesus has to people when they're dealing with other people that they have conflict with. It's in Matthew chapter 18. And so often when we think about Matthew chapter 18 and what Jesus says about people who are in conflict with one another, we think that's just about people who might be dealing with people that they aren't that close with. I think this absolutely applies to marriage. Where Jesus says, if you have a problem with somebody, don't go tell everybody else about it. Nobody should be hearing the things that are going on in that relationship except for the person that you're in that relationship with. And absolutely this applies to marriage, but absolutely it applies to our other relationships as well. That it's really hard to resolve conflict when it's not 1-to-1 and it's like 1-to-6 or to 7. It's just not fair. And it's not helpful and it's not healthy. If I would ever do anything, and I would never do anything that ever upset Bridget, because I'm just absolutely not, I'm not a perfect husband. And she went and told everybody about how awful I was, would that help our marriage? Would that give our marriage a chance to succeed? Would we be able to come back together and the two become one when all of a sudden now everybody else thinks or knows just about all the mistakes that I've made? God says you must leave, not because he somehow wants to isolate us. He says you got to leave so that the two can become one and be joined together. And to be able to have an intimacy in your marriage. Because intimacy matters. That the two would become one. And it's this mystery that happens between a husband and a wife. And when I'm saying intimacy, what I'm not saying, what I'm not saying is only that somehow this pertains to things that are physical. In fact, if you were to talk to most women and you were to talk about what's the place in a relationship, in their marriage, that allows them to feel the greatest amount of intimacy, it has nothing to do with physicality at all. Most women say the most intimacy they experience with their spouse is through words and words and words and words and words. Most men will say it's more physical. But that's why it's important to remember that you're one. Because if you don't think like that, and you start to see marriage as something that I get rather than some place where I give, you miss the best part. Intimacy is so much more than physical. In fact, the very origin of the word intimacy in the Latin comes from two words that are joined together. Inta means inside of. Mata this is just amazing. It's the sheath that encases your blood vessels. It's allowing somebody inside that which is the life source of who you are. It means allowing somebody to know the deepest parts of who you are and trusting them and being delicate with them in those places. That's when the two become one. When you share things that you aren't able and would never and don't share with anybody else. That you know that is your person. And no matter what, and no matter when it gets difficult, you know, because it's a triple braided cord, that even when it's difficult, that you can trust that person. That person is going to stay faithful, and that person is going to protect and hold that which is most intimate for you. Why do we make God the center of our relationships? It's because He's the one who allows us to experience what intimacy is all about. It's the beauty of the two becoming one. And Jesus goes on. It's the thing that happens when God's the center of your relationship is you experience safety and security. That you don't live with the fear of losing that person. Now I want to be very intentional. I want to be very careful, and I want to be very clear about this. Because far too often I've talked to people who have been in a very toxic relationship. And they've gone and they've sought all the help that they could seek. And the person that they're with is not willing to do the work to make their relationship healthy. And so that person finds themselves in a very hurtful and abusive situation. If that's you, do not stay. It is not faithful. It is not healthy. It is not life-giving. It is not loving for you to stay. If there's somebody who isn't willing to treat you the way that you deserve to be treated, then the vow's been broken. Jesus says, what God has joined together, let nobody separate. That there are vows, there are promises that you make for the people that are gathered, but more importantly, before God. Whenever I get ready to do weddings for couples, and it's one of my favorite things that I get to do, is you get to be with people on one of the most joy-filled days of their life. So we'll talk about what their ceremony is going to look like, and I always ask them, like, are you going to write your own vows, or are you going to use the traditional vows? And I would say probably about 75 to 85% of people who get married use the traditional vows. That I'm going to be with you for better, for worse, for richer, for poor, in good times and in bad, till death do us part. Sometimes people will say, you know what, we're just going to write our own vows. And at the very beginning of my time as a pastor, I didn't have people share those with me, and that was a mistake, because I remember being at a wedding where people didn't share a vow, which a vow is a promise. And all they did is they shared a poem, which is great. To tell somebody how much you love them is wonderful. It's great, but it's not a vow. And a vow is a promise that you're making. God made a promise. He made a covenant. He made a commitment to us. There was a time in which humanity had fallen completely apart. And so God saw Noah, and Noah was righteous, and Noah was good. And God floods the earth, and the waters recede. And God makes a promise to Noah, and he says, I vow that I'm never going to do that again. And God has made good on his promise. And God will always make good on his promise. And his promise is for good. It's not for penalty. And the vows that we make to the people that we're committing our lives to, they're not for penalty. They're for security. They're for stability. One of the most horrible but beautiful things that I see way more often than I'd ever want to see is when you see a husband and a wife, and you see one of the two that gets extraordinarily sick. And so often the one who's extraordinarily sick will look at their husband or their wife, and they'll say, I'm so sorry you have to go through this. And it's in those moments, as even though they're so horrifically hard, see the power of that promise. That I'll be with you in good times and in difficult times. I will be with you when we have a lot or whether we have a little. I will be with you if you are sick or if you are healthy. There's a power in that promise. And having God at the center and reminding ourselves of the promise that God made to us. And when God's at the center, we realize that promise that we can have for one another. See how important it is to protect your marriage. You need to protect your marriage. There's so many ways in which those guardrails can come down. Can't tell you in my role here at Hope how many people I talk to who are going through difficulties in their marriage because of something that's happening with their spouse online. Not protecting your marriage. I remember when I was about 25 years old, it was before Bridget and I started dating. I was visiting my mom and dad. They were living in Virginia Beach, Virginia at the time. They were just living there for a year. And my parents, I would say they probably have the best marriage of anybody that I've ever met. And I always aspired, like the beautiful thing for Bridget and I is she sees her parents' marriage and she aspired to have a marriage like theirs. And I see my parents, and they've been married for 62 years, I think? 62 years they've been married. And so my parents, this was when I was 25 years old, so this was like 23 years ago. And I was with my parents. It was just my mom, my dad, and myself. I was on a break during school at the time, so I go and I visit them. And it was like the worst thing ever because they were there, and all of a sudden my dad, like he started flirting with my mom, and it was kind of disgusting. Like it's disgusting when you're young and your parents do that. It's even worse when you're old and your parents do that. And I looked at my dad, and I'm like, I know this guy. This guy has no game at all. Like, wow, how is this happening? He's like, hey, watch this. And he goes and he scares my mom, and she giggled. And I'm like, this is terrible. Like, this is hell. Like, this is what hell would be like. Your parents flirting with one another. So I looked at my dad in an act of desperation. I looked at him and I said, how did you guys do it? If somebody like you can get somebody like her and you can make it this good for this long, how did you do it? And my dad answered me without even skipping a beat. He didn't even think about it. The first thing my dad said is, he said, Jeremy, I love God more than I love your mom, and your mom loves God more than she loves me. And the first thing I said is, does she know that? Because shouldn't we love our spouse more than anything else in this world? That's what the world will say. Shouldn't we love our kids more than anything else in this world? That's what the world will say. That's not healthy for our spouse. It's not healthy for our kids. We love God first. And my dad said it's because our love is rooted in a love that gave away everything. We can have grace for one another. My dad said, we drew a circle around our marriage. And there are parts of that circle that even you kids weren't welcomed into. We protected our relationship. We made a promise. We vowed to one another that we would come first in front of everything else except for God. That's why God needs to be the center of your relationship. It's because when your love is based on a love like Jesus, we realize that we have a love that lasts forever. Because we know that the one who had no sin became sin because of our need for him. It's in 1 Corinthians chapter 13. It's the love chapter. Now, Paul wasn't writing to the church in Corinth with a couple who were getting married in mind. He's talking about people and relationships and what does it mean to have Christ at the center of all of your relationships. But it works beautifully when we think about our marriages. It's where Paul says love is patient and it's kind. It's not envious. It's not boastful. It's not proud. It's not rude. Love doesn't keep a record of wrongs. Isn't that hard? Love doesn't rejoice about injustice, but it rejoices when the truth wins out. Love never gives up. Love never loses faith. Love endures through every circumstance. Paul says there are only 3 things that will ever last forever: faith and hope and love. And the greatest, it's love. I've said this at more weddings than I could probably count. In fact, I just got to say it at Jason and his wife Haley's wedding just a few months ago. Because I just think it makes so much sense. Because when we say love is patient, it's kind, it's not envious, it's not boastful, it's not proud, it's not rude. It doesn't rejoice in injustice, it rejoices with the truth wins out. It doesn't keep a record of wrongs, it endures through all things. We say, well, that's what you need to do. And we're like, I don't know if I can do that. Well, it's because we're misunderstanding what love truly is. Because we think when we hear that I can only love when I feel a certain way, because most certainly my feelings will dictate my actions, which is exactly the reverse way that we should be looking at it. When in reality, our feelings will follow our actions. You've heard it before. It's almost cliche that love isn't a noun, it's a verb. Love is something that we do. It's something that people give. That word for love in the Greek of the New Testament, the word is agape, and it means God's love, which is perfect, and it's wonderful, and it's absolutely the best way that you could ever translate that word. But sometimes we don't understand what that would actually look like and feel like, and how could I love like God, the God who created everything? So then we dig around in the word a little bit longer, and we see that word means charitable. Now, I love that, because that makes sense. Why does a charity exist? Because there were those who saw others who did not have. So they gave everything they had away to satisfy the need in the ones who had it. That's love. That's why we have a food pantry that's opening up this Friday, because there are people who don't have food. And so we who have food, we give it away to satisfy the need. That's love. Which now makes John 3:16 make a lot more sense, doesn't it? For God so loved the world that what did he do? He gave. He gave his one and only Son to those of us who have a need, so that even though we couldn't satisfy it on our own, he did it for us. That he gave us his body and he shed his own blood so that we could experience what true love actually looks like and feels like, and the security and the intimacy and the power of it. And maybe you're here and you're like, I wish that I had a love like that. Start with Jesus. Start with this meal. Start with the promise that he has for you. Maybe you're here and you're like, my marriage is so torn apart and it's in so many pieces. I don't know how I would, or my relationship, I don't know how I'd ever put it back together. Start with Jesus. If you need help, give us a call. Maybe you're dealing with a broken heart because of a relationship that broke up and you don't know how I could ever put we start with Jesus and we'll walk through that together. Jesus knew the power of love, and so it was the night in which he was betrayed. He took bread and he broke it and he gave it for them all to eat. And he said, this is my body and it's broken for you. Take it and eat it and do it to remember me. In the same way, after they had eaten, he took the cup of wine, and after giving thanks, he gave it for them all to drink. He said, this cup is a new covenant in my blood, and it's shed for you and for all people for the forgiveness of your sins, so that you may experience the depth and the power of my love. Take it and drink it, and do it to remember me. So as the communion servers get into place, I'm going to invite them forward. As they do that, would you please pray with me the prayer that Jesus taught us to pray. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. In just a moment, I'm going to invite you to come forward. Simply go whenever you feel that you want to go. We're going to worship while we take communion. If you come to this station, you'll come and get the bread, or the gluten-free elements are here. Come this way and you'll exit that way. If you come to this station, you'll come down this way and you'll exit that way. Same thing with this station. You'll come down this way and exit that way. There are 2 stations in the back as well. You just simply come forward and you take the bread and you can eat it, and then take the dark-colored wine, which has alcohol in it, or the light-colored grape juice, which does not, and receive the gift that God has for you. If you desire Jesus to be that for you, you are welcome at this table. All is ready. Come and receive the good gifts of a good God. And as we do that, would you please stand so we can worship with one another?